The courtroom buzzed with the usual morning activity. People shuffled in and out, lawyers chatted in hushed tones, and court officers directed traffic with practiced efficiency. Among them sat a young black teen named Andre, just 17 years old, looking small and out of place in a borrowed suit that hung slightly too large on his thin frame. His hands, clasped tightly on the table in front of him, betrayed his nervousness, though his face remained calm. Andre was there on a trespassing charge, being in the local park after hours. It wasn't anything serious, but for a kid from the east side with college dreams, any mark on his record felt like a potential roadblock to his future. His parents couldn't afford a lawyer. His dad worked night shifts cleaning the hospital floors, and his mom rang up groceries at the corner store. After discussing it as a family, they decided Andre would represent himself. It was just a minor charge after all. "Next case," called out the clerk, voice echoing through the wood-paneled room. "Case number 47382, County versus Andre. Charge of trespassing on public property after posted hours." The judge, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and half-moon glasses, looked down at the paperwork, then at the teen standing alone at the defense table. This was Judge Thomas Wilson, known throughout the county for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for unprepared defendants. He'd been on the bench for nearly 20 years and had seen it all, or so he thought. "Young man, it says here you're representing yourself," the judge said, peering over his glasses. His tone wasn't exactly mocking, but there was an edge to it, the kind that made several of the court officers exchange knowing glances. "Are you sure that's wise?" Andre stood straighter, tugging slightly at his tie. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe I can adequately represent myself in this matter." A small smile played at the corner of the judge's mouth. "Very well," he said, with the air of someone humoring a child. "And what exactly is your defense strategy going to be?" One of the bailiffs snickered quietly, and a few others in the gallery smiled behind their hands. The prosecutor, a woman in her 30s with a stack of files for the morning's cases, didn't even look up, apparently considering this case too minor to warrant her full attention. Andre felt the heat rising in his cheeks, but kept his composure. He hadn't expected to be taken seriously, but the dismissive attitude still stung. All his life, people had underestimated him. Teachers surprised when he aced tests, store security following him around, neighbors who crossed the street when they saw him coming. But he'd learned early on that getting angry only played into their expectations. "Before I present my defense, Your Honor," Andre said, his voice finding its strength, "I'd like to address a procedural matter regarding the charging document." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this response. "Proceed," he said, settling back in his chair with a look that said he was preparing himself for amateur hour. Andre took a deep breath. His heart hammered in his chest, but he knew what he was doing. For the past 3 years, he'd spent every spare moment studying law books at the public library. What had started as curiosity after his older brother's wrongful arrest had turned into a passion, bordering on obsession. He reached for a worn notebook, filled with carefully written notes and highlighted sections of legal code. The binding was held together with tape, evidence of constant use. He opened it to a marked page and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, according to State Criminal Code Section 18.4 Paragraph C, a trespassing charge on public property requires proof of both presence during restricted hours and prior notification of those restrictions. The citation fails to specify whether signage was properly posted according to Municipal Code 3522.1, which requires that closing time notices must be visible at all major entrances and illuminated after sunset." The room fell quiet. The prosecutor's head snapped up from her paperwork. The judge's small, condescending smile faded. "Furthermore," Andre continued, his voice growing steadier with each word, "the officer's report indicates I was apprehended at 9:17 p.m., but the seasonal park hours posted on the city's website show closing time as 9:30 p.m. during the month of June, which is when this alleged violation occurred." The prosecutor began rifling through her papers, apparently looking for the information Andre had just cited. The judge's expression had shifted from amusement to something closer to surprise. "I have printouts of the city's official park hours, authenticated with the digital signature of the Parks Department," Andre said, pulling out several neatly organized papers from a folder. "I'd like to submit these as evidence, Your Honor." The judge motioned for the bailiff to bring him the papers. As he reviewed them, The courtroom remained unusually quiet. People who had been half paying attention were now fully focused on the young man, who didn't fit their expectations of what a self-represented teen defendant should sound like. Additionally, Your Honor, Andre continued while the judge examined his evidence, I was at the park tutoring younger kids from my neighborhood at the picnic tables near the east entrance. We were working on math homework. I have signed statements from the parents confirming this educational activity, which falls under the community use exemption in City Ordinance 75.3 regarding park facilities. Andre's mom sat in the back row, watching her son with quiet pride. She'd always known he was special, not just smart, but determined in a way that reminded her of her own father. When Andre told them he wanted to represent himself, she'd been worried. But watching him now, standing tall despite the weight of all those judging eyes, she felt a different kind of worry lifting. Judge Wilson looked up from the papers, studying Andre with new interest. The amused glances from the court officers had stopped. The prosecutor was now taking notes. Something had shifted in the room, a realization that perhaps they had all been too quick to judge. Well, the judge said, removing his glasses, it seems we have some matters to address before proceeding further. His tone had changed completely. No trace of condescension remained. Counselor, he said to the prosecutor, are you prepared to address the defendant's points regarding park hours and proper signage? The prosecutor stood looking slightly flustered. Your Honor, I would request a brief recess to verify the information presented by the defendant. The judge nodded. We'll take 15 minutes. He looked at Andre, this time with genuine curiosity. Young man, where did you learn to present legal arguments? Andre stood respectfully. The public library, Your Honor. They have a law section on the 3rd floor. The librarians know me pretty well by now. A slight murmur of impressed reactions rippled through the courtroom. The judge almost smiled, a real smile this time, not the patronizing one from earlier. Court is in recess for 15 minutes, he announced, bringing down his gavel. As people began to move about the courtroom, Andre remained standing, feeling the weight of many eyes upon him. His mom caught his glance from the back and gave him a small, proud nod. For the first time since walking into the courtroom that morning, he allowed himself a tiny smile. The case was far from over, but one thing had already changed. They were finally seeing him, really seeing him. Not just their assumptions about who he was or what he could do. The borrowed suit didn't feel quite so uncomfortable anymore. When court resumed after the 15-minute recess, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The prosecutor returned with additional files and a legal intern in tow. Several lawyers who had been waiting for their own cases now lingered in the back, curious about the young defendant who had commanded such unexpected attention. Andre stood as Judge Wilson took his seat. The confidence he'd shown earlier remained, but inside his stomach was doing flips. He knew that first impressions only went so far. Now he needed to back it up. Court is back in session, the judge announced, tapping his gavel lightly. Ms. Reynolds, is the prosecution ready to address the defendant's concerns? The prosecutor, Ms. Reynolds, rose from her seat. Her earlier dismissive attitude had vanished. Your Honor, we've verified the park hours as presented by the defendant. The city website does indeed list 9:30 p.m. as the closing time during June. She paused, clearly uncomfortable with having to concede this point. However, the physical signs at the park entrances state 9 p.m. year-round, which creates a discrepancy in enforcement. Andre listened carefully, jotting notes in his worn notebook. He could sense the shift in how the prosecutor was addressing him, not as a kid to be processed through the system, but as a legitimate opposing counsel. As for the community use exemption, Ms. Reynolds continued, while such an ordinance does exist, it requires prior registration with the Parks Department for organized activities, which the defendant did not have. The judge turned to Andre. Would you like to respond to the prosecutor's points? Andre rose, buttoning his suit jacket as he'd seen lawyers do on the courthouse steps when he'd spent days observing them last summer. Thank you, Your Honor, he began, his voice clear and steady. I appreciate the prosecutor's verification of the park hours discrepancy. This highlights my first point. When official government sources provide conflicting information, citizens should not be penalized for following one official source over another. Andre picked up a highlighted printout. I'd like to direct the court's attention to Thompson versus City Council, a case decided by our state's appeals court just last year. The court ruled that, when a municipality provides contradictory information regarding regulations, the interpretation most favorable to the citizen must prevail. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even those who had been shuffling papers or whispering stopped to listen. The prosecutor looked at her legal intern, who was hurriedly searching on a tablet, presumably for the case Andre had cited. As for the community use exemption requiring registration, Andre continued, I refer to City Ordinance 75.3, subsection B, which states that informal educational activities involving fewer than 10 participants are exempt from the registration requirement. He pulled out another paper from his folder. I have documentation showing that our study group consisted of 6 participants, placing us well within this exemption. Judge Wilson leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. Young man, may I see that ordinance you're referencing? The bailiff collected the document from Andre and handed it to the judge, who studied it carefully. The prosecutor and her intern were now having a whispered conversation, clearly caught off guard. Your Honor, Ms. Reynolds said, we would like to verify the subsection the defendant is citing. The prosecution was not prepared to address such specific exemptions to the ordinance. The judge nodded. Very well. But I must say I'm impressed with the defendant's thoroughness. He looked directly at Andre. Where did you find this particular subsection? It's not commonly cited, Andre stood respectfully. I spent time reviewing the complete city code at the library. When my friends and I started tutoring the younger kids, I wanted to make sure we weren't breaking any rules by using the park. That's when I found the exemption for small educational groups. One of the court officers, the same one who had snickered earlier, now watched Andre with undisguised respect. Even the court clerk had stopped her typing to listen. Ms. Reynolds stood again. Your Honor, while we verify these citations, I'd like to question the defendant about the nature of his presence in the park that evening. Proceed, the judge said. The prosecutor approached the podium. Mr. She glanced down at her papers. Andre, you claim you were tutoring younger children. Can you elaborate on what you were doing? Andre nodded. Every Tuesday and Thursday I help kids from my neighborhood with their math homework. Most of them are in middle school and their parents work evenings. We meet at the park because it's central to where we all live and the picnic tables make good study spaces. And why were you still there after dark? Ms. Reynolds asked, her tone challenging but not dismissive. One of the students, a 6th grader, was struggling with fractions. We lost track of time working through problems. When we realized it was getting dark, we started packing up. That's when the officer approached us. Do you have any proof of this tutoring arrangement? Andre reached into his folder again. Yes, I have signed statements from 3 parents confirming their children's participation in the study group, as well as a letter from their math teacher acknowledging the improvement in their test scores. He handed the papers to the bailiff. I also have the math worksheets we were completing that evening, with the timestamp from when I printed them at the library earlier that day. Ms. Reynolds looked increasingly wrong-footed. She hadn't expected this level of preparation from a teenager in a minor trespassing case. The gallery watched with growing admiration as Andre calmly addressed each question with evidence and clear reasoning. No further questions at this time, Your Honor, the prosecutor finally said, returning to her table. Judge Wilson reviewed the new documents Andre had provided. The courtroom waited in anticipation. Several people who had been standing in the back had taken seats, drawn into the unexpected drama unfolding in what should have been a routine case. Young man, the judge said, looking up from the papers, your preparation for this case is exceptional. He removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. In fact, I'm curious, how did you become so interested in legal procedure? Andre took a deep breath. This wasn't about the law anymore. It was personal, but he decided to answer honestly. 3 years ago, my older brother was arrested for something he didn't do. We couldn't afford a lawyer, so he got a public defender who was handling 50 other cases. The defender barely spoke to him before telling him to take a plea deal. Andre's voice remained steady, but everyone could hear the passion behind his words. I watched my brother get pushed through a system that never really saw him. After that, I promised myself I'd learn how the law actually works. The judge nodded slowly, seeming to truly see the young man standing before him for the first time. Several jurors from another case waiting in the gallery exchanged meaningful glances. "And what has your brother's situation taught you about our justice system?" the judge asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than challenging. Andre stood a little straighter. "That it works best when everyone in the room remembers that each case is about real people with real lives, Your Honor, and that knowing your rights matters." A murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor looked down at her notes, perhaps reflecting on how quickly she had initially dismissed this case and this defendant. "Ms. Reynolds," the judge said, turning to the prosecutor, "given the evidence presented regarding the park hours discrepancy and the potential applicability of the educational exemption, does the state wish to proceed with this case?" The prosecutor stood, looking somewhat resigned. "Your Honor, in light of the information presented and in the interest of judicial economy, the state moves to dismiss the charges against the defendant." Andre's shoulders relaxed slightly, but he maintained his composure. His mother, still sitting in the back row, pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes shining with pride. "Motion granted," Judge Wilson said, but instead of immediately moving to the next case, he paused, looking thoughtfully at Andre. "This court appreciates your thorough preparation and respectful presentation. It's not often we see such attention to detail, even from seasoned attorneys." The courtroom had transformed from a place of judgment to one of quiet admiration. The same officers who had smirked now watched with respect as Andre gathered his carefully organized materials. "Thank you, Your Honor," Andre said simply. As he turned to leave the defendant's table, he caught the eye of a woman in a sharp business suit sitting in the second row. She had been watching the proceedings with intense interest, and now she was writing something on a business card. The story of what happened in courtroom 306 that morning spread quickly through the courthouse. By lunchtime, the tale of the teenage defendant who had impressed Judge Wilson had reached the ears of public defenders, prosecutors, and clerks alike. But while others were talking about him, Andre was back at his usual table on the third floor of the public library, surrounded by open law books and his trusty notebooks. The library had become his second home over the past 3 years. The librarian at the reference desk, Mrs. Patterson, looked up and smiled as he settled in. She'd watched his journey from a confused, angry 14-year-old to the focused young man he was today. "I heard about what happened in court this morning," she said, coming over to his table with a new legal journal. "News travels fast around here." Andre looked up surprised. "Already?" "Judge Wilson's clerk is married to our cataloger," she explained with a wink. "She said you were exceptional." She set down the journal. "Thought you might be interested in this article on juvenile justice reform." "Thanks, Mrs. Patterson." Andre accepted the journal gratefully. As she walked away, he let himself really feel the events of the morning for the first time. His hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline finally wore off. He'd won not just the case but something more important. He'd made them see him. Andre opened his notebook to a fresh page and began writing down everything he remembered from the courtroom while it was still fresh in his mind. He was so absorbed in his task that he didn't notice someone approaching until they stood directly across from his table. "Excuse me," said a woman's voice. "Are you the young man from Judge Wilson's courtroom this morning?" Andre looked up to see the woman in the business suit who had been sitting in the second row, the one who had been writing on a business card. Up close, he could see she was probably in her 40s with kind eyes that contrasted with her otherwise formal appearance. "Yes, that's me," he replied, closing his notebook. "My name is Dr. Lisa Carter. I'm a law professor at the university and director of the Justice Project." She handed him the business card she'd been writing on earlier. "I was in court this morning observing Judge Wilson for a research project, and I was impressed by your performance." Andre accepted the card, reading it carefully. The Justice Project was something he'd read about, a program that provided legal assistance to underserved communities and advocated for criminal justice reform. "Thank you," he said, unsure what else to say. "May I join you for a moment?" she asked, gesturing to the chair across from him. Andre nodded, quickly organizing his books to make space. "How long have you been studying law?" Dr. Carter asked, looking at the impressive array of legal texts surrounding him. "About 3 years now," Andre replied. "Whenever I can get here." "And what got you started?" Her eyes were curious but kind. Andre hesitated. He'd already shared part of his story in the courtroom. but he wasn't used to people taking such an interest. Still, something about Dr. Carter's genuine curiosity made him want to explain. My brother Dion got arrested when I was 14. He began, his voice quiet but steady. He was walking home from his job at the grocery store when some guys robbed a convenience store a few blocks away. Police picked him up because he fit the description. You know what that means. Dr. Carter nodded, her expression serious. They held him for 2 days before they even let him call home. My parents couldn't afford bail. The public defender met with him for maybe 10 minutes before telling him to take a plea deal, even though he was innocent. Andre's hands closed into fists on the table. He kept saying he wasn't there, but nobody listened. They said if he didn't take the deal, he could get 5 years instead of 18 months. So he took the deal. Dr. Carter said softly. It wasn't a question. Yeah, he served 14 months. By the time he got out, he'd lost his job, his girlfriend, and pretty much his trust in the whole system. Andre looked directly at Dr. Carter. I was visiting him when I saw the prison library had law books. Dion told me that some of the older guys were always studying them, learning how they should have been treated. That's when I realized that knowing the law might be the only protection people like us have. Dr. Carter was silent for a moment, taking in his words. So you taught yourself criminal procedure, case law, and constitutional rights all from public library books? And online lectures, Andre added. Some law schools post their classes for free. I've watched hundreds of hours of them. The constitutional law ones are my favorite. Dr. Carter glanced at his notebooks. 5 of them, filled with his neat handwriting, tabs sticking out from important pages, highlighted passages carefully underlined. What about school? Are you still in high school? I'm a senior now, Andre said. I'm on the debate team. Our coach, Mr. Hassan, helps me practice legal arguments sometimes. He's the one who loaned me the suit for court today. Dr. Carter smiled. It was a good suit. Very professional. Andre returned the smile shyly. A little big, but it did the job. Have you thought about college? She asked. About studying law formally? Andre's smile faded a bit. All the time? But law school is expensive, and my family... He trailed off, not wanting to sound like he was complaining. The Justice Project runs a scholarship program, Dr. Carter said, tapping her business card on the table. We identify promising students who demonstrate exceptional aptitude for legal reasoning and commitment to justice work. Students like you. Andre stared at her, not quite processing what she was suggesting. We provide mentorship through college, LSAT prep, and law school application support. For students who qualify, and I believe you would, we also offer substantial financial assistance. She leaned forward. Andre, what I saw in that courtroom today was remarkable. You have a natural talent for legal analysis and advocacy that can't be taught. Andre's heart was racing. Was this really happening? I don't know what to say, he admitted. You don't need to say anything right now, Dr. Carter replied. But I'd like you to come to the university next week, tour our facilities, and meet some of our current justice scholars. Bring your parents if they're available. They both work, Andre said automatically. We can schedule around their availability, evenings or weekends, Dr. Carter assured him. This is important, Andre. What you did today in that courtroom, standing up for yourself, knowing the law better than the people paid to enforce it, that's exactly the kind of advocacy we need more of. As Dr. Carter spoke, Mrs. Patterson approached the table again, carrying a newspaper. I thought you might want to see this, she said to Andre, handing him the city's afternoon edition. There on the local page was a small headline. Teen defendant impresses veteran judge with legal knowledge. There was no photo, just a brief account of what had happened in court that morning. Dr. Carter read the headline and smiled. Looks like I'm not the only one who noticed what happened today. Andre stared at the newspaper, a strange feeling washing over him. For most of his life, he'd felt invisible in a way, or visible only as a stereotype, a statistic, someone to be watched or dismissed. Now suddenly people were seeing something in him he'd always known was there but had rarely had the chance to show. My brother will never believe this, he said quietly. Is he still in town? Dr. Carter asked. Andre nodded. He works construction now, trying to get his life back on track. The Justice Project also works on record expungement and wrongful conviction cases, Dr. Carter mentioned casually. If your brother's case is something he'd like us to look at, we could discuss that too. For the first time that day, Andre felt tears threatening. He blinked them back quickly. That would mean a lot to him. To all of us. One step at a time, Dr. Carter said gently. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. These are some materials about our program. Look them over, talk to your family, and then call me to set up that visit. She stood, extending her hand. It was a pleasure to meet you, Andre. What happened in court today was just the beginning, I think. Andre stood and shook her hand, feeling as if his life had somehow shifted on its axis. Thank you, Dr. Carter. After she left, Andre sat back down, looking at the newspaper, the business card, and the folder of materials. Mrs. Patterson came by and squeezed his shoulder gently. I always knew you were going places, she said. From that very first day when you asked me where the law books were. Andre smiled up at her. Thanks for showing me, Mrs. Patterson, and for never kicking me out when I stayed until closing time. That's what libraries are for, she replied. Safe places to discover who you might become. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall library windows, Andre opened the folder from Dr. Carter and began to read about a future he'd dreamed of, but never quite believed could be real. The morning's courtroom victory had been satisfying, but this felt like something much bigger was just beginning. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. How did it go? With a prayer hands emoji, Andre looked at the newspaper, the business card, and the scholarship materials spread before him. How could he possibly explain all this in a text? He picked up his phone and simply replied, Really good. Got lots to tell you when I get home. Love you. Then he turned back to his reading, a new sense of purpose filling him as the puzzle pieces of his future began to take shape. 1 week after the courtroom incident, Judge Thomas Wilson sat in his chambers reviewing the day's docket when his clerk knocked on the door. Judge, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says you might remember him from last week. The judge looked up, curious. Send him in. Andre entered the judge's chambers wearing the same borrowed suit but looking considerably more comfortable in it this time. He carried a small folder under his arm. Your Honor, thank you for seeing me without an appointment, he said, standing respectfully until the judge gestured for him to sit. Andre, Judge Wilson said, setting aside his papers, I certainly remember you. In fact, you've been the topic of quite a bit of discussion around the courthouse this past week. Andre nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. That's actually why I'm here, sir. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? The judge raised an eyebrow. For what? As I recall, you won your case on your own merits. For treating me with respect, Andre said simply. After you realized I was serious about my defense, you listened. You didn't just rush me through or talk down to me. That meant a lot. Judge Wilson leaned back in his chair, studying the young man before him. In his 20 years on the bench, he couldn't recall a defendant ever coming back to thank him, especially one he'd initially misjudged. I appreciate you saying that, the judge replied. But if we're being honest, I should be the one thanking you. You reminded me of something important that day. What's that, sir? That justice works best when we check our assumptions at the door. The judge's expression was thoughtful. I've seen thousands of cases come through my courtroom, and it's easy to fall into patterns of thinking, to see categories instead of individuals. You disrupted that pattern in the best possible way. Andre seemed surprised by the judge's candor. May I ask what brings you here today besides offering thanks? Judge Wilson asked. Andre opened his folder and removed a brochure. Dr. Lisa Carter from the university's Justice Project was in court that day. She's offered me a chance to apply for their scholarship program. Lisa Carter, the judge said, nodding with approval. She's doing excellent work over there. I've had several of her students clerk for me. She invited me and my family to tour the campus and learn more about the program. Andre continued. We went yesterday evening, and the judge leaned forward, genuinely interested. It was... Andre searched for the right words. It was like finding a door I didn't know existed, sir. They have a full pre-law track, mentorship programs, even summer internships at firms downtown. That sounds like an excellent opportunity, Judge Wilson said. It is, Andre agreed. But there's one thing I'm worried about. What's that? Andre hesitated, then spoke carefully. The application asks for a letter of recommendation from someone in the legal field who can speak to my aptitude and character. I don't really know any lawyers or judges except... He looked directly at the judge. Judge Wilson understood immediately. "Except me. I know it's asking a lot," Andre said quickly. "You only saw me in court for one case. But Dr. Carter suggested that since you presided over my hearing, you might be willing to write something, even just a short note." The judge was silent for a moment, considering the request. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a legal pad. "When's the application deadline?" he asked. Andre blinked, surprised by the immediate response. 2 weeks from Friday, sir." "I'll have something for you by the end of this week," Judge Wilson said, making a note on his calendar. "But I'd like to know more about you first." That was an impressive performance in court. But a letter of recommendation should speak to more than just one morning's work. For the next half hour, Judge Wilson asked Andre about his studies, his family, his goals for the future. He listened intently as Andre described his self-directed legal education, his work tutoring younger kids in the neighborhood, and his dream of eventually starting a community legal clinic to help people like his brother. "My brother still has a record for something he didn't do," Andre explained. "It affects everything, where he can live, what jobs he can get. I want to help people clear their records when possible, and make sure they have real representation when they need it." The judge made notes as Andre spoke, occasionally asking follow-up questions. As their conversation drew to a close, he set down his pen. "I think I have what I need," he said. "And for what it's worth, I believe the Justice Project would be lucky to have you." "Thank you, sir," Andre said, standing to leave. "I really appreciate your time." As Andre reached the door, Judge Wilson called after him. "One more thing. That case you cited in court, Thompson versus City Council. That was quite specific. Not something you'd find in a general legal textbook." Andre turned back. "I read all the recent state appeals court decisions. The library gets them online. That one caught my attention because it seemed like it could help people who get caught in contradictory government regulations." The judge shook his head, impressed once again. "Most first-year law students don't show that level of initiative. You're going to make a fine attorney someday." After Andre left, Judge Wilson remained at his desk, reflecting on their conversation. He buzzed his clerk. "Patricia, please clear my lunch hour tomorrow. I need to make a phone call to an old friend at the Bar Association." The next day, Judge Wilson sat in his chambers, speaking on the phone with Henry Okafor, the president of the State Bar Association and his former law school classmate. "Henry, I'm calling about a rather unusual matter," the judge began. "I had a young defendant in my courtroom last week who displayed exceptional legal aptitude. Self-taught, citing relevant precedent, better prepared than most attorneys I see." "Sounds impressive," Henry replied. "What's the catch?" "No catch. He's 17, from the East Side. His brother had a bad experience with the system a few years back, which inspired him to learn law on his own. Now he has a shot at the Justice Project scholarship, and I want to make sure he gets it." "The Justice Project? Lisa Carter's program?" "The same," Judge Wilson confirmed. "I'm writing him a recommendation, but I thought the bar's mentorship program might be a good fit for him as well." There was a pause on the line. "Tom, we typically pair mentors with law students, not high school students." "I understand that," the judge replied. "But this young man is extraordinary. He's already at a first-year law student level of understanding, at least in criminal procedure. He just needs guidance and opportunity." Another pause. "You really believe in this kid, don't you?" "I do," Judge Wilson said simply. "Enough that I'm calling in a favor with the president of the Bar Association." Henry chuckled. "Well, when you put it that way, send me his information and I'll see what I can do." 2 days later, Andre was helping his mother prepare dinner when there was a knock at their apartment door. His father, just home from his shift at the hospital, went to answer it. "Andre," his father called. "There's someone here for you." Andre came to the door to find a courier holding an envelope. "Delivery for Andre from Judge Thomas Wilson's office," the courier said. Surprised, Andre signed for the envelope and brought it to the kitchen table. His parents gathered around as he carefully opened it. Inside was a sealed letter addressed to the Justice Project Scholarship Committee, along with a note for Andre. He read the note first. "Andre, enclosed is my letter of recommendation for the Justice Project application. I've also taken the liberty of recommending you for the State Bar Association's mentorship program, which pairs promising future attorneys with experienced legal professionals. You'll be hearing from them soon. Your performance in my courtroom reminded me why I became a judge in the first place, to ensure that justice is accessible to all. I look forward to watching your career develop in the years to come." Judge Thomas Wilson. Andre's mother read the note over his shoulder and squeezed his arm. "Look at that," she whispered. "A judge writing to our son like he's a colleague." Andre's father shook his head in amazement. All this from that day in court? They really must have seen something special. "Can I see the recommendation letter?" his brother Dion asked, having just arrived for dinner. Andre looked at the sealed envelope addressed to the scholarship committee. "It's sealed. I'm not supposed to read it," Dion grinned. "Man, when I told you to learn about the law so they couldn't mess with us anymore, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Andre carefully placed the letter and note back in the envelope. "It's just an application. I might not even get it." "You'll get it," his mother said with quiet confidence. That judge wouldn't be doing all this if he didn't think so too. As they sat down to dinner, Andre felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. A week ago, he'd been just another kid from the East Side with big dreams but limited opportunities. Now suddenly doors were opening. People in positions of power were seeing his potential, and a future he'd barely allowed himself to imagine seemed within reach. "Whatever happens with that scholarship," his father said as if reading his thoughts, "you've already done something important. You stood up for yourself in that courtroom and made them listen. That's something no one can take away from you." Andre nodded, thinking about how different his experience had been from his brother's. Same system, different outcome, all because he'd had knowledge on his side. "If I do get into this program," he said, looking at Dion, "the first case I want to work on is yours. Dr. Carter said they help with expungements." Dion shook his head. "Focus on your future, little brother. My case is old news." "It's not old news if it's still affecting your life," Andre insisted. "And anyway, that's the whole point. I don't want to be a lawyer just to wear nice suits and make money. I want to fix things that shouldn't have happened in the first place." His parents exchanged a look of pride, mixed with concern, the look of parents who want the best for their child, but worry about the battles they might face. "One step at a time," his mother said, echoing Dr. Carter's words from the library. "First the scholarship, then college, then law school, then you can change the world." Andre smiled, thinking about Judge Wilson's note. The judge had seen something in him worth nurturing, worth fighting for. After years of feeling invisible in so many spaces, that recognition meant everything. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. Carter. "Just got a call from Judge Wilson. Impressive recommendation. Looking forward to receiving your completed application." Andre showed the message to his family, and their small apartment filled with excited chatter about possibilities that had seemed impossible just a week before. As he looked around at their animated faces, Andre made a silent promise to himself. This was just the beginning. 6 years later, the university auditorium buzzed with anticipation as families gathered for the law school graduation ceremony. The room was a sea of black robes and colorful hoods, with proud parents craning their necks to spot their children among the graduates. In the third row of graduates sat Andre, now 23 years old. The borrowed suit was long gone, replaced by graduation regalia and a quiet confidence that came from years of hard work and academic achievement. He adjusted his cap and glanced back at the audience, easily spotting his family, his mother dabbing at her eyes already, his father sitting tall in his Sunday best, and his brother Dion grinning widely, giving him a thumbs up. But they weren't alone. Beside them sat Mrs. Patterson, the librarian who had helped guide his self-education all those years ago. Next to her was Mr. Hassan, his high school debate coach who had loaned him that first suit. And a few rows behind them, looking surprisingly ordinary in a crowd of proud families, sat Judge Thomas Wilson. The judge had kept his word and then some. Not only had his recommendation helped secure Andre's spot in the Justice Project Scholarship Program, but he had also become one of Andre's most steadfast supporters. Through undergraduate studies and law school, Judge Wilson had checked in regularly, invited Andre to observe complex cases in his courtroom, and connected him with invaluable networking opportunities. "Justice is a system built on relationships," the judge had told him once. "The law's in the books, but justice happens through people who care enough to do the right thing." As the dean of the law school approached the podium to begin the ceremony, Andre thought back to that morning in court 6 years ago. How terrified he'd been, how certain he was that no one would really listen to him, and how determined he'd been to make them hear him anyway. The dean's voice echoed through the auditorium. Today, we celebrate the achievements of extraordinary individuals who have dedicated themselves to the study of law and the pursuit of justice. Andre's mind drifted to some of those achievements from his time in law school, helping to establish a legal clinic that served the East Side neighborhood where he'd grown up, working with the Innocence Project to free a man who had served 12 years for a crime he didn't commit. And most personally satisfying of all, successfully petitioning to have his brother's record expunged during his second year. He remembered the day the expungement was granted. Dayon had stood in the courtroom, tall and proud, as the judge, a colleague of Judge Wilson's, signed the order that removed the conviction from his record. The court finds that justice is best served by granting this petition, the judge had said. Those words had meant everything to their family. The dean continued, and now, it is my honor to introduce our student speaker, selected by faculty for outstanding academic achievement and commitment to the principles of justice. Graduating with highest honors and the recipient of the Dean's Award for Public Service Law, please welcome Andre. A wave of applause filled the auditorium as Andre rose and made his way to the podium. His family erupted in cheers, his mother's voice rising above the crowd. "That's my baby." Andre adjusted the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. So different from that courtroom 6 years ago, yet the feeling was familiar. The need to speak truth, to be heard, to use his voice for something that mattered. "Thank you, Dean Williams," he began. "Distinguished faculty, fellow graduates, families, and friends, it is an honor to stand before you today." He paused, looking directly at his family, then at Judge Wilson, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. 6 years ago, I stood in a courtroom representing myself on a minor trespassing charge. I was 17, wearing a borrowed suit and facing a system that I had every reason to believe wouldn't listen to me. But I had one thing going for me: I knew the law. I had studied it in the public library, reading every book and case I could find because I believed that knowledge might be the only protection available to someone like me. Andre could see Judge Wilson listening intently, a hint of emotion on his normally stoic face. What happened that day changed the course of my life. Not because I won my case, though I did, he added with a small smile that drew chuckles from the crowd, but because for the first time, I experienced what it feels like when the justice system works the way it's supposed to. When people in power are willing to set aside their assumptions and truly listen. He looked across the rows of his fellow graduates. Many of us enter the legal profession because we've witnessed injustice and want to fight it. Others come to uphold traditions that have served society well. Whatever brought us here, we now share an extraordinary responsibility. The law is not just a set of rules in books. It's a living system that can either crush people's spirits or lift them up, depending on how we choose to wield it. Andre's voice grew stronger as he continued. The most important lesson I've learned in my journey from that courtroom to this stage is that justice requires both knowledge and humanity. Knowing the statutes and precedents is crucial, but seeing the human beings affected by those laws is equally important. From his vantage point, Andre could see some of his professors nodding in agreement. Dr. Carter, now his mentor and friend, sat with the faculty, visibly proud. As we leave this university to begin our careers, we will face constant pressure to see cases rather than people, to process rather than listen, to win rather than seek truth. Resisting those pressures will be our daily challenge. Andre turned slightly, addressing his fellow graduates directly. Each of us will serve justice in different ways. Some will become prosecutors, ensuring that laws are enforced fairly. Others will be public defenders, making sure every person receives adequate representation. Some will write corporate contracts that protect workers and communities, while others will shape policy that expands access to justice for all. He paused, looking back at his family. My own path was shaped by watching my brother struggle with a criminal record for something he didn't do. It taught me that injustice doesn't just happen in dramatic moments of obvious corruption. More often, it happens in the quiet spaces where people are too overwhelmed, too under-resourced, or too discouraged to fight back. Those are the spaces where we, as attorneys, have the power and the duty to make a difference. Andre's mother wiped tears from her eyes as his father held her hand tightly. Dayon sat tall, no longer burdened by a record that had limited his opportunities for so many years. Today, I'm proud to announce that after passing the bar exam, I'll be joining the Community Justice Center as a staff attorney. focusing on record expungements, housing rights, and criminal justice reform in underserved neighborhoods. A wave of applause interrupted his speech. The Community Justice Center was known for its groundbreaking work, advocating for systemic changes while providing direct legal services to those who needed it most. When the applause quieted, Andre continued, his voice filled with purpose. 6 years ago, I stood alone in a courtroom, terrified but determined. Today, I stand before you as part of something much larger, a community of legal professionals committed to ensuring that justice is not just an ideal, but a reality for everyone, regardless of where they come from or what resources they have. He looked directly at Judge Wilson, who was watching him with undisguised pride. I want to thank those who saw potential in me and created opportunities where none seemed to exist. A judge who could have rushed through my case but instead took the time to listen. A professor who happened to be in court that day and offered me a path forward. A librarian who never once suggested that the law books might be too complicated for a teenager to understand. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as several people around her looked at the unassuming librarian with new appreciation. And most of all, my family, who taught me that dignity doesn't come from other people's approval, but from knowing your own worth and standing up for it, even when, especially when, others try to deny it. Andre's voice grew stronger for his conclusion. Fellow graduates, we leave here today armed with knowledge and credentials that give us power in our society. How we use that power will define not just our careers, but the kind of justice system we create for the next generation. I hope we use it wisely, compassionately, and in service of a justice that truly sees everyone as equal under the law, not just in theory but in practice, every day, in every courtroom, for every person. He stepped back from the podium as thunderous applause filled the auditorium. His fellow graduates rose to their feet, followed quickly by the faculty and audience members. Andre returned to his seat feeling both humbled and resolute. After the ceremony, as families and graduates mingled outside the auditorium, Andre found himself at the center of a circle that included his family, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Hassan, Dr. Carter, and Judge Wilson. The judge shook his hand firmly. Exceptional speech. Reminded me why I wanted to be a judge in the first place. Thank you, sir, Andre replied. For everything. Judge Wilson shook his head. No. Thank you for reminding an old judge that the system can work the way it's supposed to when everyone in the room remembers what justice really means. Dr. Carter smiled. The Justice Project's first ever graduate to deliver the commencement address. I'd say our investment paid off. Dion put his arm around his younger brother's shoulders. Who would have thought that my getting arrested would lead to all this? Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. Their mother clicked her tongue. Let's not go that far. But I will say, seeing you in that cap and gown makes every struggle worthwhile. Mrs. Patterson beamed at Andre. I kept every newspaper article about you, you know. The librarians have a whole scrapbook. Our legal eagle, we call you. As they talked, a young teenager approached hesitantly, clutching a program. Excuse me, he said to Andre. I'm here with my cousin who's graduating. I heard your speech. I'm from the east side too. Andre turned to the boy with a warm smile. What's your name? Tyler, the boy said. I want to be a lawyer too, but everyone says it's too hard. Too expensive. Andre's family exchanged glances, recognizing the echo of Andre's own past. Tyler, let me introduce you to some people who might have something to say about that, Andre said, bringing the boy into their circle. This is Dr. Carter, who runs the Justice Project that helped me get through school. And this is Judge Wilson, who taught me that the legal system works best when we recognize each other's humanity. As Dr. Carter began telling Tyler about youth programs at the university, Andre caught Judge Wilson's eye. The judge gave him a slight nod, an acknowledgement of the circle completing itself, of justice working not just as punishment or process, but as a means of lifting people up and creating new possibilities. 6 years ago, a judge had mocked a black teen in a courtroom, not seeing him as he truly was. But when that teen had started speaking like a top attorney, the judge had been wise enough to recognize his mistake and brave enough to correct it. And in that moment of recognition, something important had shifted, not just for Andre, but for everyone touched by his journey. Now, standing in his graduation robes surrounded by the people who had helped make this day possible, Andre understood that true justice wasn't just about knowing the right legal precedents, or making the most eloquent arguments. It was about seeing people's potential and creating systems that allowed that potential to flourish. It was about remembering that behind every case number was a human being whose life could be forever altered by how they were treated in the courtroom. As he watched Dr. Carter exchange contact information with Tyler, Andre felt the weight of his new responsibility. He was no longer the teenager fighting to be heard. He was now the attorney with the power to make sure others were listened to, and he intended to use that power well.